The autumn had dropped. The place with its gray sky and withered garland, its buried spaces and scattered dead leaves, was like a theater after the performance, all strewn with crumpled playbills. In The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, we start out with a group of people who are talking about a child and how they would react if they were haunted by a ghost or saw a ghost. And a man named Douglas kind of says to the whole group, hey, I have a story where that happened, but not with one child, with two. But you need to wait a little bit. I need to get the manuscript. So the next day, he gets this story. He says that his sister's governess shared this story with them. And then Henry James pulls us into this story of a governess who is called to Bly Manor to take care of Flora and Miles. The children are orphans who are being cared for by their uncle. They're under his care, but he wants nothing to do with them. He's hired this governess and he has said, I don't want to know what goes on with them. You're in charge. And he's not there. And it's just the governess, the children, and the staff that's there. We meet Mrs. Gross, who is a housekeeper, I think. We find out pretty early on that she can't read, and we find that out because the new governess gets a letter from this uncle, and enclosed in that letter is another envelope that has not been opened that is from Miles' headmaster. And the uncle says, you're the one who's responsible for them, you read it. She opens it up and she discovers that Miles has been expelled. He's not allowed to come back to his boarding school, and there's really no reason given. So now we start down this path where she starts to question Mrs. Gross about, well, is Miles, he seems so sweet and angelic, and so does Flora, do they have issues? And Mrs. Gross slowly opens up to say, no, not really. A little bit later, this new governess starts to see apparitions. She sees a stranger who is dressed in her master's clothes, this uncle who wants nothing to do with the kids. And then later on, she sees a female. And so she starts to share with Mrs. Gross, like, I'm seeing these people. And as she describes them, Mrs. Gross tells her, oh, that's Quint, who is a former butler or valet of the master. And the woman that you're describing is Miss Jessel, who was the former governess. They both have passed away. So at this point, I'm really starting to wonder about Mrs. Gross. One of the things about Victorian authors is they often will name their characters based on specific characteristics. And so I'm wondering if Mrs. Gross really is gross, if she is a complicit character in some evil, bad things that were done with the children by Miss Jessel and Quint, because she's slowly leaking information, which just, again, makes it seem shady because she's not really forthright with the information. The new governess discovers something and then has to pull and question it out of her. The other thing is Miss Jessel sounds a lot like Jezebel, which, with the reputation that she supposedly has, it now, again, through Mrs. Gross, is finally coming out that Miss Jessel and Quint had an illicit, intimate affair that the uncle didn't know about, but that the children did. And so that was the point on page 56 when I realized that this book was not what I necessarily thought it was. I knew that it was a ghost story, but it has turned out to be something more than a ghost story and much more sinister. So it turns out that the new governess thinks that the children can also see the apparitions. I just got to a section in the book where Miles does something to try to show the new governess that he really is bad, that he's hearing her say how angelic he is, but he actually is bad. And it really is heartbreaking. Mrs. Gross really does imply that the children were somehow involved in this intimate affair between Miss Jessel and Quint. I am hoping that it is something similar to The Go-Between, in which was written in the 1950s, in which a boy was caught in the middle of an affair between a man and a woman who were not supposed to be together, and he was carrying messages. So I'm hoping that there was something a little bit more innocent to it, and that the kids maybe saw them kissing, saw them having a relationship, and then it wasn't anything gross. But the governess thinks that the kids can see the ghosts of Miss Jessel and Quint, and she starts to kind of play this game with them where she's watching them to see what they see and how they react when she sees these apparitions. As I am getting to page 90, I am really starting to wonder if the governess is just unhinged. I am really wondering if she is an unreliable narrator, because she sees the apparitions, and if you look at the words that people are saying and you watch the reaction of the children, she thinks that they're ignoring them, but there's no evidence that the children can see the ghosts. She also doesn't necessarily seem to be afraid of the ghosts. She's like engaging with them and kind of having standoffs with them. And she claims that it's in a way to protect the children, and maybe it is, but I don't know. It's just weird. Like the way that the governess thinks she's like absolutely sure, and then later she's kind of doubting it. When she sees the ghost in the beginning, she sees the male dressed in the uncle's clothes, the master's clothes, and she has some sort of infatuation with the uncle where she was like fantasizing that he would arrive, and that was when she saw this ghost in the clothes. I don't know. Like, I'm feeling like, is she imagining all of this? And it's like an alternate reality, and she's just kind of fitting it into whatever scenario. But then you start to think, like, she didn't know about Quint, and she didn't know about the former governess, so the fact that she was able to like create this story out of thin air, I don't know. After finishing The Turn of the Screw, I think I have more questions than answers. I can't tell if the children were abused. I can't tell if that is a subject that a Victorian novel really would have, is that there was actual abuse. I can't tell if Flora and Miles were kind of just around Miss Jessel and Quint when they were in their relationship together, and so they saw things maybe that they shouldn't. I can't tell, but this book is very much an exploration of either abusers and the impact that they have on children in a long-lasting way, or it's the story of a completely unhinged governess whose imagination runs wild and causes extreme havoc. So I can't figure out if the governess is just imagining all of this and has created this alternate reality, or if the children really have been abused and there really were ghosts. I don't think I've read another book like this. I don't know if it's a book that I would say I loved, but I find it very intriguing, and the ways in which Henry James is able to kind of weave a tale where you're really not sure. Once you kind of understand what could be going on, you're really not actually sure what is going on. So if you have read The Turn of the Screw or anything by Henry James, please leave a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are. I am ending this book with more questions than answers. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time.